It was like I was sort of ping-ponging, like slowly trying to heal and pull away and manage the struggle with pulling away from toxic relationships and in the most peaceful way possible, but not really being aware of how to do that. The last person that I dated was one of the last evenings that I saw him. And I remember we had like a horrific fight and he said some like awful things. And I was so upset, I was so depleted. And it just was like, God, when is it gonna get better? When I was younger, that it would be better when I'm older. Like, how much older do I gotta be? Like, I'm 40 years old. And then all of a sudden I had this like recall. And I remember like, geez, I've been telling myself that for a really long time. How long have I been telling myself that? If you have a hard life when you're little, it'll be better when you're older. Totally unintentionally. That very question was what threw me into what is commonly known as shadow work. It can be referred to whatever you want, but when God is ready for you to take a look at the places that you have wounds, like where the root is at, you're gonna look at it. One way or another, you're gonna look at it. That alone. Like, when did I start saying that to myself? And I realized that I had been saying that to myself since I was little. And I actually ended up recalling my first conscious memory. And it was the day that my dad left our family home. I remember I was like clinging to his leg and I was crying, and he had a bag in his hand, so I knew he was leaving. And I was just asking him, where are you going? Why are you leaving? And saying that he'll be back and stuff like that. And I was saying, I don't want you to leave. Where are you going? Don't leave. I want to go with you. And he was saying I couldn't go with him. Your mom wants me to go, so I'm going to go. And I was like, no, you can't leave. I was so upset. I remember I was hanging on to him for dear life. He got a house not far from there in Euclid. It was right on the lake. It's total dump. The neighborhood was very dicey. My mom, being the way that my mom was, which I'll get into in a second here, you just learn to observe. And I think for a lot of people, because most people that are traumatized or abused as a child, or they have a parent that is emotionally unavailable, they tend to get very selfish. They tend to be very self-serving, and it's a protective measure, right? What most people miss, definitely for me in my journey and my story, because most of the people that I have talked about this to were never really listening to me, because most of the time I was with a narcissist. They don't really pay much of attention to the things that hurt you and the significant experiences that you've had in your life. And so they miss like very important details. And even my siblings, and definitely my mother, but even my siblings and other people, I don't think a lot of people really realized the bond that I had with my dad until really revisiting a lot of my childhood and healing my inner child, that I came to understand the significance of him in my life, and the divine worked things out in such a powerful way that I would have been placed into his hands. I always felt, even before I went through this awakening or whatever, that my dad was like grossly undervalued as a human being and was never treated the way that he should have been treated, even up until the time that he died. Obviously, I was only 14, so I didn't get much say-so about the fact that he was in a nursing home. But my family putting him in a nursing home, my brothers and whatnot, and the way that he was being treated there, I knew he was miserable. And people just didn't really understand the bond that I had with my dad, how much I loved him and how unconditionally loving he was to me, and the time that we spent together, the type of wisdom that he gave to me is still things now to this day. You know, I could write a book about just the wisdom bombs that he would drop on me, and even teaching me about Jesus and the difference between following Jesus and following rules in a church. And again, this isn't anything against any kind of church. I have deep respect for the Catholic Church, all churches. I have deep respect for all religions, and deep respect for all people, actually. When I speak about the negative aspects or nefarious aspects of any religion, group of people, whatever, just know I'm talking about the people who abuse culture. They abuse that religion because they're using that as a mask. And ultimately, it's a negative reflection on that entire group of people if there are people within those groups, organizations, religions that are not doing things the way that they claim to. That's how there's any kind of negative connotation around any religion, really. It didn't stem from people that were actually following the beliefs of the religion, following the doctrines of the religion. Definitely not Christians who have a negative connotation about Christians. It's because they've listened to, they've been raised in. It's like whatever spiritual avenue you went down that you got gaslit and abused, and that label got weaponized against you, or you grew up in it, now you associate that with a particular type of energy or behavior. You have to heal that within yourself to realize, like, that's not everybody. My childhood and going through hypnosis even was some very powerful revelations about my childhood and about my relationship with my mother, and a lot of memory recall about like the people that were around my mom and my entire my family, even when I was little, and starting to remember some of the things that happened to me in my childhood with the organizations and the people that she was affiliated with. And it took me really a long time to piece it all together too. And just starting to look at, like, where did the initial fracture with my mother come into play? That this breakdown that led to her being not good to me, you know, being cruel to me. Started to really remember some of the things that went on in my childhood specifically that were directed at me, and how much that bond that I had formed with my dad really did affect her. And it was almost like a sense of, I think, jealousy for her in a way, which is odd because she's the one who divorced my dad. My mom was like very covert in the way that she would abuse my dad, and how observant that I was, that I don't think other people observed, but my dad knew that I observed. And the thing is my dad also never really took the aspect of like giving back to her what she gave to him. He sort of just took it on the chin. And when I would say things to my mother, like I would call her out for the way that she was treating him, she didn't like that. Or she would, you know, just ignore me or not be there at all. You know, that was another thing that I found like really, really strange. Like, she wanted to divorce him, but then she was gone all the time. Like, my dad would come to our family home and be there with us while she was doing whatever she was doing. And, you know, I remember she used to bring like men to pick her up or go out on a date or whatever while my dad was there. It was so strange to me that she would do that. And I knew it hurt my dad, you know, and it wasn't like my dad was like trying to be very obvious about like the pain that was causing him, but I knew it was causing him pain. And the more like I was like bonded to my dad, especially as his health started to decline. The more like cruel she was to him. Mom used to always have something to say about my dad's health, and he was a big guy. He's a big guy. I think my dad was like almost 400 pounds when he passed away, and he had diabetes, and he smoked, and he loved to eat. My dad loved to eat. She was very triggered by the bond that we had, and even in like me helping my dad used to like really bother her. My dad would get like sores and stuff on his legs because of his diabetes, and helping him with like his bandages, and I used to help him like get in his wheelchair in and out of the car because he, eventually was in like a wheelchair because of his mobility and his circulation. It's like she always had something to say about just me doing like normal like things that a kid would do for their parent. And just wanting to spend time at my dad's house instead of wanting to be at home either by myself, because eventually she told me he couldn't come to the house anymore. But like I want to say I was about 10 years old, and my mom picked me up for school one Monday morning, and we were gonna stop at McDonald's on the way to school, and I was like, okay. And we're driving, and all of a sudden she like pulls into like this hospital thing or whatever, and I was like, what are we doing here? And she's like, oh, we gotta pick up some paperwork or something, I don't know. And like doctors and stuff like came in, and they started questioning me about my dad, and like asking me very strange questions. And I was like, why are you asking me these questions about my dad? Like, what is this all about, And I got very like defensive and quiet. Like I was afraid to say anything wrong. I didn't know what to say. And like, she accused my dad of sexually abusing me. and then she left, and she left me there at that hospital. And of course I had to have like exams and stuff, and which in itself was actually, it was like, if there was anything that was abuse, it was like, that was abuse. But, and they, that I was like in this like unit, and I didn't understand why, but it was like, it was like a unit. I was like 10 years old. And, there was kids in this group, and they were all talking about like really scary things that their parents had done to them and their families and uncles and like the neighbor. And it was horrifying. We'll never forget that time ever, because of the trauma that it caused me at that age, to hear about what was happening to these kids that were just like me. And like I didn't have fear before that moment. And then like when you're telling like the doctors and the nurses, like I was telling people, like, my dad didn't hurt me. Like, I don't know why you're believing her. Like, she's lying. And it was like none of this, like my whatever I was saying like didn't matter. Horror movie where they're like siding with the monster. And then, my dad, when he came, like, we had to like have like family therapy or something like that. I don't know. But when my dad came, I just remember like they wouldn't let me talk to him on the phone. But then like it was brutal to see my dad in like so much pain. And I remember I had to be like I wanted to be like so tough for him, because I didn't want to upset him. And it was just brutal for him. I think he was just like beside himself that she would even go that far. But once that was over, I think that it not having whatever desired effect that she was hoping that it was going to have pissed her off even more. Maybe 2 years later, my mom was like really invested in this group, and family jokingly called it like a cult or whatever. It was very strange, this group that she was always off with. And some people in my family were also in it as well. And, you know, my dad and I remember my dad and my Uncle Jim, you know, they would like joke about it. Or I think, you know, my brother Sylvia was pretty invested in it. I think my brother Carmen got pretty invested in this group. Maybe my other two brothers did as well. I think some of her other family members, some of the Rollins family, were invested in this group. But again, I was so young. I was only 12. Like, I really didn't know what it was. I was like 11, 12 years old. I do remember that I knew it was for like businessmen, and like the people that would be around my mom were like, they were all like business people, career people. I remember that, you know, my mom was like very invested in her career, but, you know, I didn't really understand really what her career was. I know she worked at nursing homes, and she would be like a guardian for like elderly people. And she was really invested in cared for the elderly people. I used to go to like the nursing homes with her and stuff that she worked at. She did worked in the activities department and stuff. And my mom like was like really determined for me and my sister to like be a part of this, whatever this group was. There was multiple times that I was like, had these people around me and didn't even know it. You know, I think we went to Niagara Falls one time, and now that I'm recalling some of the interactions I had there, and then some of the other interactions around people that were around, now who some of those people are, but I didn't know it at the time. When I was 12, they were having this like seminar or whatever in Chicago, and my mom like posed it to us like it was going to be this like great trip. It's going to be this like fun trip to Chicago, and she was telling us all the cool things there are to do in Chicago, not knowing that we were really going to be trapped in a room for the entire day into groups and stuff. And it was very strange. It was very strange. There was like this like leader that was like talking, and then you would like split off into groups, and they had like 2 girls and 2 boys, and then they would separate the girls from the boys. And I was deeply uncomfortable with not okay with some of the questions that they were asking, and they didn't like to be challenged. And they definitely recognized that I was independent in my thinking. I think they could read that I was reading them. What's your intentions? But anything that was really connected to my mom, I didn't trust. And even if I didn't know that at the time, it was like if they were invested in her, I was questioning them. We got my menstrual cycle for the first time while we were there, which was very strange because I was only 12. I remember overhearing my mom like talking to somebody about it, like talking to people about it. And I was like, why is she talking about this with people? And I didn't understand like what was the significance of why she was talking about this with people. And I was just very guarded in the whole experience. Like I didn't want to go with any of the group or anything like that. But, you know, without saying too much more, my testimony yet, but now I know that was NXIVM. That was NXIVM. And I've definitely seen some of the people that I saw there on the news. About 6 months after that, my mom took me and my twin sister Angela to a therapist's office. My mom was like always wanting me to go to a therapist. When you're with someone, or like you're, you know, a child of someone that has like zero accountability, no self-awareness, and is constantly projecting and pointing the finger at everybody else, you know, they're desperate to find something wrong with you so that they don't have to take any accountability for being a shitty parent. Like there has to be a reason that I'm not bonded with my child, and it can't be me. That's the hill she stands on still at 81 years old. And that's okay. It's like, that's okay. You can stand on that hill, you know, once you go through the cycle of forgiveness, but you're not going to drag my children to that hill. And this therapist visit was a little bit different because when we got there, first of all, it was a therapist I'd never been to before, but then it was also my godparents, the Rizzos, who, you know, I didn't feel negatively towards, but like we weren't super bonded or anything. Like they were very kind to me. They were good people that I can recall, but you know, I just wasn't very close with them. It was strange that they were there at this therapist's office, and they're like, we're going to take you in one at a time. And so we go in, and my dad's in there. And I was like, what's going on? He looks like very upset. And then my mom proceeds to tell me that my dad was not my biological father. I remember looking at my dad, and you know, he carried a cane sometimes when he wasn't using his wheelchair, but he had his head down on his cane, and when he looked up at me, I could tell he was trying so hard not to cry. And you know, he had like tears rolling down his face, and I remember looking over at my mother with just disgust, utter disgust. And I think whatever shred of respect that I had for her was like completely gone after that. And my dad apologized for keeping the secret, which is the kind of man that he was. You know, he said that he was afraid that I wouldn't love him the same, or that I would think of him differently, or I wouldn't think of him as my dad anymore, and that's why he kept it a secret all, you know, my whole life. But when I thought back at like everything that my mother had put him through, like even down to like divorcing him, and like finding out that the only thing that he ever asked of her after we got, you know, after she got pregnant from an affair, was that me and my sister never find out that we weren't his biological kids. And now I will say that I likely would have found out eventually, because I look significantly different than my brothers. They're all like big, hairy Italian guys. But it really spoke to who my mom was. But I think once again, it sort of had the opposite effect of what my mother was intending. And this is the case for all narcissists too. You know, they don't have the ability to see that they're projecting onto everybody around them. And if they get to this level of diabolical, which anybody who's a part of any cult or any closed religion does, because you brainwash yourself. And when people don't challenge you, when people don't withdraw from you, so that you have to sit with yourself and you have to look in the mirror and you realize you've screwed up your own life by being horrific to your children and to other people. But, you know, most covert narcissists, like the real diabolical type, people don't really realize, like, they have a target. You know, they have a projection screen that they make the villain so they can stay the hero. And in this case, that was my dad. Even though, like, this man raised kids, went through a divorce, was even paying child support. How do you treat someone that horrific? Like, how do you falsely accuse someone of sexual abuse after they agreed to stay married to you and they're raising kids that don't even belong to him? I mean, you have to be... And at the same time, it only served to, like, the deepest level of respect for my dad, even at that age. I remember thinking, like, damn, you're a hero. Like, thank God for you. Like, who would I have become if he hadn't agreed to be my dad? And we actually had that conversation. And it's one I'll never forget. Process all these years later of hypnosis, that I started to recall some of the earlier dreams and understanding of where that bond was formed, and even some conversations, not only everything that I just mentioned that I start to recall, but also where it was in my life that I first felt the feeling of knowing that my dad wasn't going to live long. And I recalled probably right around that same time, maybe a little bit before that, when I had a dream. And at the time, I didn't recognize in the dream that it was Jesus. I thought it was an angel. I knew it was like an authority. I needed to make sure that I listened to what my dad was telling me, and that he knew the truth, and to pay attention to everything that he said. And I might not have as long with him to be able to remember these things or revisit things with him later. And I remember getting upset in my dream. But at the same time, I had this like level of peace that I hadn't known before. Like, it was a very, you can't even articulate it into words, articulation for the words. And to be able to like return to that in through the process of hypnosis was pretty wild. You know, that's something that you just are like in awe of for, you know, a few weeks at least. I was like, that is wild. Who would have thunk you could do that? But I talked to my dad about that dream. We were playing, my dad used to teach me to play poker. And I told him about the dream. And he said that he knew. He said he knew. I said, you knew? He said, yeah, I knew. And I said, how did you know? He said, well, I talked to Jesus too. And I said, I was like, what? And he said, yeah, I always talk to Jesus. And I told him that I was afraid that he was going to die. And he kind of blew me off or whatever, but like, he didn't give it a lot of attention. He didn't give a lot of energy to whatever fear I was feeling around it. But he let me know that even if I couldn't see him, that he was always going to be there protecting me. And all I needed to do was make sure that I protect my heart, raising, you know, me and my sister. And that's why he did that. That he didn't do it for my mom necessarily, but that he did it because Jesus had visited him and told him that he needed to. And he needed to protect me. Really focus on, you know, giving energy to any fear that I had about, you know, why wasn't I going to have long with him, and how long was I going to get exactly? I was always trying to get him to do exercises with me after that. It's like, I was always like, let's cook something healthy together. Feeling like I don't know what I would do if he died. And I think the closer to like that time in my life, I remember that's when my mom was just like super going in on him all the time, just about like ridiculous things, and also still like invested in what he had going on in his life. Even when he was living in an independent living facility and then he got moved to a nursing home, it's like my mom was always like lingering around the peripheral. And it's like, why? And it was really rough. I think they wanted to put him on a liquid diet or something, and that was really hard. That was really hard on him. And being a heavier guy, and he was having me like asked to stop for fast food on the way to visit him and stuff like that, and he would have me pick him up like a cheeseburger. Like one time he gave me some cash and asked me if I could find some way to get him a pack of smokes. So I was 14. On one of probably the last visit that I had with him, he asked me to make him a promise that I would never settle for anybody that treated me less than I deserved. And If a man ever shows me that he's unsafe, to believe him and to leave quietly and trust my intuition. And he reminded me that Jesus was going to be protecting me, and that he was always going to be there protecting me as well. And I didn't have anything to fear, and I could still talk to him anytime I wanted. And he made me promise, though. He was serious. He made me pinky promise. And little did I know at that time, here all these years later, that promise saved my life multiple times. The purpose that I have now in this world, and it's so sad that like people choose to focus on such negative things, and they miss the true glory of God and the way that God is a living God in our lives and all of our lives. And it's hard not to get emotional, because I am a very deep person, but there's all these like sacred experiences that everybody has in their life, and sometimes until you are in your mission and your destiny, you don't get to understand the significance and of these moments in your life, and without that significance, you might not know. Going through the healing of my inner child and revisiting all of these things, as deeply painful as it was, but just knowing the significance of all of the things that happen in your life and the way that they do, and when you go within and do the healing work, it brings so much meaning that isn't based in trauma anymore. And I really also started to understand why I didn't necessarily have that bond with my mother, and any guilt that I had around that. And then also being very clear that was a form of God protecting me, that I had the awareness that I did. Learn at a young age to question things, but to also be observant. If you can go within and heal and recognize how holding on to what people did to you is having you miss the lesson in where it was training, where it was preparation. Born to someone who essentially really didn't want you to begin with, but then kind of used you as a weapon against your parent. You recognize how magnificent God was to you, to put you into the hands and speak to the heart of a man who essentially gave up so much, the amount of pride and shame that my father must have had to confront, to hold that secret all those years, while also being brutally emotionally and psychologically abused by my mother. The strength that he always had that nobody really ever acknowledged, because it takes an extraordinarily strong person and someone deeply connected to God to be able to do that. And to look at that experience and no longer look at the negative aspects of who my mom was to me and the lack of a bond with her, but to look at my childhood as more of just with utter gratitude of how different it could have been, and how God is always with us, even in horrific experiences. You recognize that just really from the very start that there was always a plan for you. And even if people hurt me throughout my life and people didn't get me or didn't understand me, or projections they wanted to send to me, or whatever narrative they wanted to create, it's powerful to know that you were chosen by God, and that God really was the one that was in charge in writing your story. And then the gratitude of being taken down a path where you get to have the awareness of it even was magical. It's pretty special, actually. And all of this while things were wrapping up in a court case where now my mom was trying to falsely accuse me of hurting my kids and trying to file for a legal visitation or guardianship or whatever, while also having nobody see me. And then I realized what was actually happening, and that my mom sacrificed my dad, and she was diabolical in it. Like, there was no doubt that was always going on in the background. And once you realize that she belonged to a cult, and the psychological and emotional damage that affected his health, his physical health, and the sequence in which everything happened with his passing and all of that, it was only 2 years after letting me know that he wasn't my biological father, that he passed away at the beginning of December. I was a freshman in high school. Very hard time. He died of a heart attack on a Monday. It was kind of a free-for-all. My mom was not invested at all. I used to have to take the bus or walk to school every day. Sister wasn't there for the first part of my freshman year and stuff, so nobody even knew I was a twin. We had just moved to the city, and my dad had just passed away. And I made friends. My best friend throughout high school, her name was Stacy Smirlo, and her and I became very close friends. I grew very close to the people that embraced me at that time. My other best friend, Alyssa, and we just had this little crew, this little high school crew, and we really didn't fit into a category. We were kind of a hodgepodge of people. End of freshman year, beginning of sophomore year, my twin sister got pregnant. So I think she was either just turned 15 or was about to turn 15 when she got pregnant. Traumatizing also. First she was going to have my sister give the baby up, but then, around Christmas time, she told her she'd keep the baby. And I was kind of really in the background then. My sister she was a good mom. But, she was still a teenager, and she still wanted some freedom, and she was still a teenager taking care of a baby, and we shared a bedroom. She had talked to my cousin about me moving in with my cousin, and then, she dropped me off at my cousin's house. I think I want to say I was maybe 16. And I left her house and never went back. We were just drifting, partying, going to raves and hanging out with my friends and taking random trips to New York in the middle of the night, and just being a teenager, trying to get through high school, which was not great. I was not invested at all in high school. She would occasionally give me money here and there for that, just to make sure I had some of the things I need. Like an orphan. I felt like an orphan. I felt like I lost my best friend, and I felt, who's going to take care of me? Who's going to protect me? Who's going to talk to me?